This is a submarine and this is Europe, except 85 million years ago. If you tried to take that submarine into that sea, it wouldn't be a good idea. You'd probably run into this, or worse, this right here.
The word back then was strange.
Today's Europe looked more like this, a cluster of tropical islands. Dinosaurs already dominated every continent, and there were still roughly 24 million years to go before the asteroid that would cause the mass extinction. And at the center of it all was Europe, home to giant marine reptiles that turned the sea into chaos.
The most bizarre part is that while there were monsters in the seas,
there were dwarf dinosaurs on the European mainland. While sauropods measured between 16 and 26 feet in Europe, the same animal reached about 82 feet in North America and 98 feet in Africa.
The most interesting thing is that Europe was a kind of infernal paradise.
It probably looked more like the Bahamas, a warm climate, shallow waters, often crystal clear. But what lived on the seafloor turned the continent into a hell. If a Magyarosaurus wanted to migrate from one island to another, it would probably be brutally devoured along the way by a giant reptile.
In this video, we're going to get to know the Europe you've never seen, the Europe that was an ocean.
While today Europe is known for its harsh winters, snow-covered mountains, and temperate forests, around 90 million years ago it was a completely different place. Much of the continent was tropical. Where cities like Paris, Amsterdam, and Berlin now stand, there were shallow seas of warm water, coral reefs, and hundreds of islands blanketed in lush vegetation.
Back then, the planet was far warmer than it is today.
Intense volcanic activity released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, driving up the global temperature. With a much hotter planet, there were essentially no large polar ice caps to store water as ice.
Almost all of that water stayed in the oceans.
The result was a tropical Europe full of oceans. Almost all of that water was part of a single gigantic ocean known as the Tethys Sea. The water there was only a few dozen feet deep, extremely warm, crystal clear, and rich in corals, mollusks, fish, and countless other marine animals.
In many places, the environment resembled the modern-day Bahamas, only on a continental scale.
While the shallow seas were dominated by an explosion of biodiversity, the deep waters belonged to the great predators. It was right there that some of the largest marine reptiles of the entire age of the dinosaurs patrolled.
Let's get to know the animals that live here.
It all started with microscopic organisms like phytoplankton, which use sunlight to produce energy. These tiny beings fed the zooplankton, which in turn fed thousands of species of fish, crustaceans, and other animals.
They formed enormous reefs, occupying miles of ocean floor.
Gliding among them were giant ammonites. Some species had shells up to about 6.5 feet in diameter, while their tentacles stretched more than a foot to snatch small prey.
Just above the reefs came schools of enormous fish.
One of the most impressive was Xiphactinus, a predatory fish that could reach 20 feet in length. Its mouth was so large that fossils have been found with fish nearly 6.5 feet long swallowed whole in the stomach. Patrolling those waters were sharks like Cretoxorhina. At about 23 feet long and more than 2 tons, it was one of the largest sharks of the Cretaceous. Its teeth reached nearly 3 inches. Enough to tear big chunks of flesh from just about any animal in the sea.
But the true monsters started to appear soon after.
Long-necked plesiosaurs could exceed 33 feet in length. In some species, the neck alone measured more than 16 feet, letting them attack fish and cephalopods while keeping the body far from their prey. And then came the kings of those seas. Species like Mosasaurus, Prognathodon, and Haenosaurus reached between 46 and 56 feet in length. The head alone could measure nearly 6.5 feet, bigger than a grown adult human. The mouth was equipped with dozens of teeth up to 4 inches long, plus a second row of teeth on the roof of the mouth that kept any prey from escaping. On a normal day, Xiphactinus, a 20-foot predatory fish, spent all day hunting schools of prey. But when a mosasaur appeared, the 20-foot giant simply vanished between its jaws. Not even the enormous sea turtles were safe. A single bite from Prognathodon was enough to crack the shell of animals weighing hundreds of pounds. The plesiosaurs used their necks, many feet long, to catch fish near the reefs, but a mosasaur hidden below them could strike the entire body in a single lunge.
Europe's islands were separated by shallow channels.
Whenever a dinosaur tried to swim across from one island to another, it entered the territory of the ocean's greatest predators. A young Magyarosaurus, a Rhabdodon, or any other dinosaur that ventured into the water could be ambushed by a mosasaur rising from the depths. A single attack was all it took to drag the animal to the bottom. A few miles from the islands, the ocean floor plunged hundreds of feet. The water stopped being crystal clear, the temperature dropped rapidly, and the sunlight faded away little by little. After a few hundred feet, the only light came from the surface, arriving as nothing more than a distant blue glow.
Down in the deep, giant animals lived.
The smallest predators were the Dercetidae, extremely elongated fish that usually measured between 1 and a little over 3 feet. They lived in the mid-water hunting small organisms, but they were also one of the favorite prey items of nearly every large predator in the ocean. Just above them were the Enchotus, fish roughly 3 to 5 feet long. Their bodies didn't draw much attention, but they had enormous dagger-like teeth
Capable of easily piercing other fish.
Belanostomus reached about 3 feet and resembled a giant needlefish. Its long snout let it snatch small fish with lightning-fast strikes. At about 3 to 6.5 feet came Apatiotus, a predatory fish armed with serrated teeth specialized for slicing chunks of flesh while chasing down its prey. At roughly the same size was Simolictis, another fast hunter of the open ocean,
Built to chase down smaller fish at high speed.
The Anemiotus, generally between 1 and 3 feet, occupied a completely different niche. Instead of chasing prey, they had flattened teeth capable of crushing mollusks and hard-shelled animals. Among the smaller marine reptiles was Chirinodons, which reached about 6.5 to 13 feet. Although it was a mosasaur, its rounded teeth were made for crushing shells, ammonites, and tough mollusks, rather than tearing flesh. Also around 6.5 to 10 feet came the Squalicorax sharks, famous for their serrated teeth. They hunted live animals, but also took advantage of any carcass they found in the ocean. The largest fish of the environment started to appear with Pachyrhizidus, which could reach about 6.5 feet. It was a robust predator that occupied an intermediate position in the food chain. Saurocephalus easily topped 6.5 feet and specialized in catching relatively large prey, swallowing them whole. Another giant among the fish was Protosphaerina, which reached about 10 feet. Its streamlined body resembled that of a swordfish, allowing fast pursuits in the open sea. Relatives of Xiphactinus were also present in the European ecosystem. These enormous predatory fish could reach about 16 feet and were capable of swallowing surprisingly large prey. Near the coast lived Thoracosaurus, a marine crocodiliform about 16 feet long. Unlike the mosasaurs, it preferred coastal channels and shallow margins, where it ambushed fish and other animals. The large cretoxarinid sharks reached about 20 feet. They were extremely fast predators of the open ocean and ranked among the top hunters before the arrival of the largest mosasaurs. Also around 20 feet was Plioplatycarpus, a mosasaur far lighter and more agile than its giant relatives. It relied on speed to catch fish, squid, and other quick animals. The polycotyllids, short-necked plesiosaurs, ranged between 10 and 20 feet. Their compact bodies allowed for rapid acceleration while chasing fish. The gigantic turtle Allopleuron hoffmanni could exceed 13 feet in length and weigh nearly a ton. It fed on fish, invertebrates, and even carcasses found in the sea. The elasmosaurids were among the largest plesiosaurs of Europe. Some exceeded 33 feet in length, though much of that size came from the enormous neck alone used to catch fish and cephalopods. Entering the group of true giants came Prognathodon saturator at roughly 39 feet. Its extremely robust skull produced one of the strongest bites of any known marine reptile, capable of crushing turtles, giant ammonites, and even other reptiles. Nearly the same size was Hinosaurus bernardi, reaching about 43 feet. Its elongated body and rigid snout made it an excellent open ocean pursuer, specialized in catching large prey. At the absolute top of the food chain was Mosasaurus hoffmanni, which could exceed 43 feet in length and weigh more than 11 tons. It was the largest predator of the European ocean, capable of attacking practically any other animal that shared those waters with it.
But as terrifying as that ocean was, the strangest part of this story wasn't underwater. It was up on the islands.
Remember how, at the very beginning, I said Europe was an infernal paradise? Well, now we need to understand why those two words fit together so well. Because while the sea was dominated by 43-foot monsters, the islands were home to something almost comical by comparison: miniature dinosaurs. And this was no accident. It was a law of nature in action. When a large animal gets stranded on an island, something curious begins to happen over thousands of generations. The island simply doesn't have enough food to sustain giants. There are no endless plains, no forests stretching for hundreds of miles, no gigantic rivers. There's only a patch of land surrounded by water on every side. And nature has an answer for that. The animals shrink. Scientists call this phenomenon insular dwarfism, or the island rule. It works roughly like this. In a small space with limited resources, smaller individuals have the advantage. They need less food, reproduce earlier, and survive more easily when food grows scarce. Generation after generation, the big ones disappear and the small ones take over, until after a few million years, What was once a colossus becomes a pocket-sized version of itself, and that's exactly what happened in the European archipelago. The most famous example from this lost world lived in a region that today lies in Romania, an ancient island that paleontologists named Hatzeg Island. It was one of the many patches of land surrounded by the Tethys Sea, and it functioned like a natural laboratory of evolution. The star of that island was Magyarosaurus, the little sauropod about 20 feet long that I mentioned earlier. For most people, 20 feet already seems enormous, but for a sauropod, that's practically a hatchling. Its relatives on other continents weighed dozens of tons. Magyarosaurus, on the other hand, could be compared in mass to some land animals of today. It was living proof that even the largest groups of dinosaurs could be miniaturized when the environment demanded it. But it wasn't alone. Sharing the island with it lived Rabdodon, a medium-sized herbivore that moved on its hind legs and spent its days stripping the low vegetation of the tropical forests. There was also Telmatosaurus, a primitive relative of the duck-billed dinosaurs, equally reduced by island life, and Zalmoxes, another compact, robust herbivore perfectly adapted to a world where being small was an advantage, not a weakness. It was an entire ecosystem of scaled-down versions, a world in miniature, as if someone had taken the fauna of a continent and dialed down the zoom. And the most interesting thing is that the true king of the islands wasn't a dinosaur. In almost every ecosystem of the age of the dinosaurs, the top of the terrestrial food chain belonged to a large carnivorous predator, a theropod with powerful jaws capable of taking down enormous prey. But the islands had a problem. As we saw, islands don't sustain giants, and with no large prey to hunt, there was no room for large predatory hunters. So nature did something unexpected. The tyrant's place was taken by an animal we'd normally expect to see in the skies. We're talking about Hatzegopteryx, a colossal pterosaur. With its wings folded, it walked on all four limbs like a creature out of a nightmare, standing as tall as a giraffe. On its feet, it could look a human straight in the eye and still have neck to spare. Its head was immense, with a beak capable of swallowing prey the size of the island's own dwarf dinosaurs. Think about that for a moment. In a world where the dinosaurs shrank, it was a flying reptile that grew and seized the throne. Hatzegopteryx probably patrolled the islands on foot, stalking young Magyarosaurus and any other animal small enough to be overpowered. The supreme hunter of that paradise didn't roar from within a forest. It walked on wings. Now put the two halves of this story together and you'll understand why Europe was at the same time a paradise and a hell. On the islands lived small, relatively peaceful herbivores in a warm climate surrounded by crystal clear waters. It seemed like the perfect setting, but there was a cruel detail. These islands were separated from one another by shallow channels of water, and every so often, an animal needed to cross from one island to another, in search of food, in search of new territory, in search of mates. And that's where paradise turned into hell. The moment a young Magyarosaurus, a Rabdodon, or any other dinosaur set foot in that water, it stopped being the resident of a peaceful island and became just one more prey item in the territory of the ocean's greatest predators. A mosasaur hidden in the depths could surge up in a single lunge, close its jaws over the animal's body, and drag it down before it even understood what was happening. All it took was one miscalculated crossing. All it took was a second of distraction, and the paradise swallowed its resident.
Imagine for a moment the sunrise over the Tethys Sea.
The warm light passes through the shallow, crystal-clear water, illuminating the rudest reefs that stretch for miles across the bottom. Schools of small fish flash like silver as they weave between the giant shells. An ammonite 6.5 feet across glides slowly by, drawing in its tentacles. Everything seems calm. Everything looks like a tropical aquarium on a continental scale. On a nearby island, a group of Magyarosaurus wakes and begins to feed on the moist vegetation. In the distance, silhouetted against the sky, Hatzegopteryx watches, motionless, waiting for the right moment. But it's in the water that the real drama unfolds. A 20-foot Zephactinus patrols the boundary between the shallows and the deep, chasing a school of fish. It accelerates, opens its enormous mouth, and swallows a prey almost whole. For an instant, it is the hunter, and then the water darkens beneath it. A mosasaurus weighing more than 10 tons, which had been waiting silently in the depths, shoots upward. There's no time to flee. The 20-foot giant simply vanishes between the jaws of something far larger. The hunter became the hunted in a fraction of a second, and the sea goes quiet again, as if nothing had happened. That was the rhythm of that world. Beauty and violence separated by a few feet of water. Maybe you're wondering, if Europe was once a tropical ocean full of monsters and islands, why isn't it like that today? The answer has to do with two great changes. The first was slow. Over millions of years, the planet gradually began to cool and the continents kept moving. The collision between the plates that would eventually raise mountain ranges, combined with the gradual drop in sea levels, pushed the water out of those shallow shelves. Where reefs and channels once existed, land began to emerge. Little by little, the islands started to connect, and the floor of the ancient Tethys Sea turned into dry ground. The second change was brutal and sudden. About 66 million years ago, that asteroid, the one that was still 24 million years away back at the beginning of our story, finally struck. Within hours and months, it triggered the mass extinction that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, the great marine reptiles, the ammonites, and much of the life that dominated that ocean. Mosasaurus, Prognathodon, Hinosaurus, all the kings of that sea disappeared forever. What remained was an empty world, ready to be rebuilt by new survivors. And over the following tens of millions of years, that slowly uplifted ocean floor transformed into the continent we know. The very same regions that were once tropical reefs today hold cities, temperate forests, and snow-capped mountains. And yet, that world didn't vanish completely. It left clues. Every time someone finds the fossilized shell of an ammonite embedded in the rock of a European mountain, they're holding a piece of that ancient ocean. Every mosasaur tooth unearthed in the quarries of the Netherlands and Belgium is a reminder of the monsters that once patrolled those waters. Mosasaurus hoffmanni itself, the largest predator in our story, was discovered right there, in the heart of Europe, in rocks that were once at the bottom of the sea. So the next time you look at a map of Europe with its mountains, its forests, and its cities, remember that all of it was once submerged. Remember that beneath the ground where millions of people now live, lies the ghost of a tropical ocean full of islands, dwarf dinosaurs, and marine giants.
For tens of millions of years, Europe was not a continent. Europe was an ocean.